Folks, again, we're still on verdict watch there. They've been deliberating now about 52 minutes or so right now. Let's welcome in our guest with us, trial attorney Mackenzie Joy Brennan. Mackenzie, great to see you. Thank you so much for joining us here on the program. And I want to address what Kelly was just talking about, this idea as to why Juliana Margulies would lie. For me, that is one of the strongest parts of the defense's case. I think there's a pretty good reason why she would lie. And I think that freedom, the fact that she was struggling with being in prison, she's in another country, she was corresponding with both the defendant and her family, wanting to get out of there. She was talking about depression. It makes sense to me that that's something she would do. So I don't know if that's really a great area for the prosecution.
Yeah, I think it can go both ways. I think the challenge is that somebody in her position who is telling the truth would also do all the things that the defense is describing as being questionable. So to me, it's not really decisive either way. I think the money is going to be a big piece for the jury because juries love decisive pieces of evidence like that. And I'm wondering if there are son of Sam laws in Virginia that might impact how much she can profit off of something like this, because that's surprising to me that she potentially could profit at all. A lot of states do prohibit that. And I could have seen that as being part of the terms of her plea that she not participate in something like that, because it does harm the prosecution's case. So that's interesting. I don't know personally whether I think that it affects the image of her credibility, because the bottom line is she was an incredibly vulnerable person in terms of the power dynamic here. And she also did not take the easier plea early on. So this really is not the best case scenario for her. And if she were looking for the simple best case scenario, it seems like there were other off ramps that she actively declined to take. And this is not a super great one for her. You know, she's not going to have a good life after this. It will be hard to get a career. She tried to come to this country. That's not going to pan out. It's not a great outcome for her. So I don't know how compelling that is in the end.
All right, not a great outcome for her. I need to talk about what stood out to me was a specific piece of the defendant's testimony when he testified, and a reason why I question any of his story. Let's listen to that together.
Christine told me that she was bleeding out and that she was sorry and that she loved me.
And she's chatting with you with these wounds in her neck, correct?
Yes, her voice is very hoarse. She was having difficulty speaking, but yes, she was talking to me.
All right, Mackenzie Joy Brennan still with us. Let me ask you, I mean, I just found it so unbelievable. Oh, she told me she was bleeding out. She's bleeding out. And oh, well, she was having a little difficulty. Her voice was a little hoarse. What do you make of this testimony?
That was so incredible to me. I don't know, you know, I'm not a physician, who knows, but I don't know that hoarseness would be the effect of aspirating your own blood, which I think would be the primary hindrance to her communicating. And that really was the suspicion that a lot of folks would have, that, you know, if she is bleeding out, that would be evident. She had a clotting disorder that he knew about. Would she be hoarse or would she be choking and aspirating on the blood? And then pairing that with the priorities of what she chose to share with him by his own account, which is, you know, a lot like him telling his credentials to 911 and bringing them up as frequently as possible. Her priority, according to him, was how much she loved him, not their daughter, not any other things that she wanted to share about the circumstances or telling her parents anything, but I love you so much. By the way, I'm dying and I know this. And then those are the only things that she has to say. I'm not buying it.
Mackenzie, let me ask you a question. You have a client who, you know, if he says he wants to testify, you'll have him tell you the story that he wants to tell. And he tells a story that includes those types of details which don't make any sense to you listening to it. I agree. There were a number of things when he testified that I was like, if I heard that, he was my client, I'd say maybe we want to rephrase that or look at that a little differently. I try to steer him in a different direction. What would you do if you had someone who was insisting on taking the stand, but there were parts of their story that just didn't quite add up? How do you handle that?
Yeah, I think that's a very challenging situation because he clearly had things that he wanted to share. I thought that about the sad affect that was kind of weakly performed. He essentially just made like a sad face through his direct, but immediately dropped it on cross, even when the same emotional topics came up. And I think that as his attorney, it would have been much more prudent to, presumably they rehearsed these exchanges to some extent, to be straight with him. Say, look, your sad face, I'm not buying it. So try a different tack. Go for I'm going to be strong and stoic and try to sell that. Try to see what he can act best, because what he ended up selling doesn't work. And the only reason I can think for not addressing that beforehand is trying to spare his feelings. Or, maybe he put his foot down to the extent that a client can with those sorts of decisions. And he's like, no, this is convincing. I'm going to go with this. Now, the story elements that you're referring to, I wonder if they didn't prep those sorts of things, but he still went rogue, because that is certainly something that any good attorney would say, yeah, that doesn't make a lot of sense, or let's find a way that could make sense and re-describe it. But he went rogue. That's the only thing I can think, because that's such an obvious hole in their story.
Yeah. And Judge, I can't imagine that he is that type of person. Just listening to his testimony, watching him throughout the trial, seems to have a very strong personality, very confident personality, very law enforcement type personality. So it doesn't surprise me if that happened.
I agree with you. If he went rogue, it wouldn't surprise me either. Now, of course, we have to keep in mind, you and I talked about this yesterday, you always have to tell your client, tell the truth. But the way in which they tell the story is strategy that you can help shape.
Absolutely. Or you can help them remember better. Sometimes they're not remembering straight. Are you sure that happened that way?
Right.
Are you sure this, so those types of things. But yes, you don't want to tell them to lie.
Right.
You do not do that.
No, right. But interesting story he did tell. Coming up next, though, we are going to turn to New Jersey for testimony from the Mansion murders trial for Paul Caneiro. Find out what the lead detective says investigators found at the victim's home.
An affair with the family's au pair lead to double murder.
I'm gonna kill her, I'm gonna kill her.
It's a case of sex, lies, and deadly deception.
The Au Pair Affair murder trial. Live coverage today on Court TV.
Tonight on Closing Arguments, 12 jurors are weighing the evidence in the Au Pair Affair murder trial. Court TV teams are on the ground with the latest verdict watch updates.
Closing Arguments with Vinnie Politan. Tonight at 8, 7 Central. Only on Court TV.
The fate of defendant Brendan Banfield is now in the hands of a jury. They've been deliberating now for just over an hour.
He is accused of being the mastermind behind an elaborate plot to lure an unsuspecting man to have violent sex with his wife, Christine, and then frame him for her murder. We will bring you into court, of course, if there's a jury question and when there's a verdict.
All right, first we are going to turn now to New Jersey for the Mansion murders trial for Paul Caneiro. Court is dark today and testimony is set to resume on Monday.
Caneiro faces life in prison if he is convicted of killing 4 members of his own family back in November of 2018. The body of his brother Keith was found on the front lawn of his home. Keith's wife's body was found inside the house along with the bodies of their 2 children.
Prosecutors say that Paul killed them because Keith found out that Paul was stealing money from their joint businesses and threatened to end Paul's salary. All right, we're going to go into court now, but before we do, let's get you caught up on the case.
We allege that the defendant repeatedly shot and killed his brother while he was outside of the side of his home, and then moved to murder the rest of the family inside the home.
Paul Caneiro is accused of killing his brother and his brother's family and then setting their mansion in Colts Neck, New Jersey on fire to cover up the brutal murders. 50-year-old Keith Caneiro was shot in the head and in the back. His wife, Jennifer, was shot and stabbed. Their 11-year-old son, Jesse, and 8-year-old daughter, Sophia, were both repeatedly stabbed. Investigators say after killing them, Caneiro set fire to their home to destroy the evidence.
Sir, what are you reporting?
Okay, fire.
A neighbor called 911 when he noticed the Caneiro house was on fire. Then he saw a body.
Oh my God, there's blood here. It's a corpse.
It's what?
It's dead.
What's dead?
There's somebody's dead here.
Prosecutors say Caneiro also set his own home on fire the same day in nearby Ocean Township, New Jersey.
That fire was effectively a ruse designed to make it appear as if the overall Caneiro family was somehow targeted.
Prosecutors say Paul Caneiro's motive was money. Keith and Paul Caneiro owned a tech firm and a pest control business together. And according to court documents, Keith was about to cut off Paul's salary after finding out he had stolen tens of thousands of dollars from him.
This one is the most brutal case that I've seen in my experience here.
Caneiro was indicted on multiple charges, including 4 counts of first-degree murder. He pleaded not guilty and maintained he had nothing to do with the murders. All right, what we want to do now is bring you key moments from the trial from earlier this week when we were covering the Brendan Banfield trial. We're going to pick it up now with testimony from the lead detective in the case, Stephen Vogt. Here, he's on direct by the state.
Okay, so let's talk about November 20th of 2018. What, if any, notifications did you receive?
I was notified by, at that time, Sergeant Ryan Muller of the crime scene unit and advised to respond to 15 Willowbrook Road in Colson.
About what time did you respond?
About 2:51.
Okay, and who, if anyone else, was already there from the crime scene unit in the prosecutor's office?
So specific to the crime scene unit, Sergeant Muller was on scene, as well as Detectives Cordoma and Flanagan.
Now, were you ultimately assigned as the lead detective from the crime scene unit?
Yes, I was.
Okay, and what does it mean to be a lead detective?
So being the lead detective essentially means that, especially in a large-scale investigation like this, there's going to be a lot of detectives involved. I believe every detective in the crime scene unit have had a role one way or the other throughout this investigation. But as the lead, all evidence, all photographs ultimately funnel their way to me. That might be through the evidence as it's being collected, maybe in another scene, because I can't be in 2 places at once, is going to be brought back to the crime scene unit's temporary evidence vaults, and ultimately gets put into my custody. And the reason we do that is to ensure that nothing gets missed. We want to bring it in, and then those decisions are made by the lead as to what the next steps are. And again, just so that I'm reviewing and understanding everything that's going on throughout the investigation.
So you're essentially like the point person?
Yes, I'm the evidence custodian, if you will.
Did you write a report in this particular case?
I did.
Okay, you wrote several reports, right?
Yes, I did.
Did you write your first report in particular on February 1st of 2019?
Yes, I did.
Okay, I'm going to show you what's marked as S275. May I approach, Judge?
Okay.
I'm showing you what's marked as S275. Is that your report that you wrote on that date?
Yes, it is.
Okay, I'm just going to ask you if you need to refer to your report, just please let us know.
Okay.
Can you lay out the scene for the jury as to 15 Willowbrook Road when you arrived?
Sure. Upon my arrival, so 15 Willowbrook Road is a large property located on the south side of Willowbrook Road. That's in between the intersections, as I mentioned earlier, of Route 34 and Evergreen Lane. Upon my arrival, I ensured again that the crime scene was secured, which it had been by fire police were at those intersections, basically making sure that no unauthorized vehicles came in. There were multiple fire department members and trucks lined up along Willowbrook Road, as well as in the scene to ensure that, because there was active and ongoing fire suppression efforts going on. So there was still a very active fire at that time, to include heavy smoke emanating from the interior of the house. It was approximately 47 degrees and cloudy on that day. And I was advised upon my arrival, what I knew right away was that there was one male victim deceased on the front lawn.
Now, you talked about how there were other crime scene unit detectives from your unit on scene already.
Yes.
Were there any other officers or detectives from the prosecutor's office on scene when you arrived?
Yes.
Who was that?
I spoke with Detective Patrick Petrozello, and not from the prosecutor's office, but also Detective Rich Cirillo from the Colts Police Department. But they were on scene from the major crime, or at least Pat was, from the Major Crimes Bureau.
Shortly after you arrived, did you and they and the other officers from your unit engage in a field briefing?
Yes.
What is that?
So we meet, especially for homicides, but in general, we always want to meet, and two reasons. One is to assign roles. That was really at that time when I was assigned as the lead forensic detective. I was also advised of everyone else's role within the crime scene unit. Sergeant Ryan Mueller was supervising as well as assisting as needed. Detective Flanagan was assisting as needed. He had already taken several photographs prior to my arrival. And Detective Cordoma was assisting from a crime scene standpoint, but was also responsible for the origin cause investigation as well as electrical wiring documentation.
So as a result of that field briefing, did you learn any information that happened or things that occurred prior to your arrival?
Yes.
And was that helpful to you in terms of your job as the lead detective from the crime scene unit in terms of processing the scene?
Yeah, so it was just getting an overall understanding of the scene. Like I said, the fire was still active. Fire suppression efforts were still going on. Detective Flanagan had taken a series of overall photographs of the scene, and we want to do that, especially in a fire, as early as possible. So he was obviously there earlier. So he took those photographs, and it helps with the origin and cause investigation. It showed, heavy flames coming there, specifically from the photographs from the rear of the property showed heavy flames coming from the interior of the residence, and generally speaking, where those flames are. We also, I'm sorry, can you repeat the remainder of that question?
Okay, I was actually going to ask you if you could, along those same lines, if you could tell us who, if any, victims did you learn about? You already mentioned the one, but can you please just describe for us all of the victims and their names and their locations?
Sure. So I was advised that Keith Caneiro was located in the northwest of the property, or northwest of the building. He was deceased and covered with a tarp. That tarp was utilized by fire personnel. Jennifer Caneiro, her body was located inside the foyer. So basically, if you walk through the front door, make an immediate left, there was two sets of stairwells. One's going up and one was descending down to the basement. Jennifer Caneiro's body was...
So the fire was still active when they arrived. Up next, we're going to hear where those children were found. More testimony from the murder trial for Paul Caneiro in New Jersey up next.
Welcome back to Court TV Live. I'm Michael Ayala here with Judge Ashley Willcott, and we are on verdict watch in the Au Pair Affair double murder trial for Brendan Banfield in Virginia. The jury has been deliberating now for 1 hour and 19 minutes. Of course, we'll keep a close eye on the courtroom where if that jury comes back with a verdict or a question, of course, we're going to bring that to you live.
And now we want to turn to New Jersey, though, for the mansion murders trial for Paul Caneiro. Court is taking a break today, so court is dark, and we want to use this time to get you caught up on key testimony that you may have missed.
Prosecutors say that Paul Caneiro killed his brother Keith, his brother's wife, and their 2 children, and then set their mansion on fire to try to cover up his crime.
He's also accused of setting his own home on fire to make it look like they were both targeted. Some crazy cases these days. We're going to pick it back up where we left off with lead detective Stephen Vogt still on direct.
Was located on the floor in the foyer with her head on her back, with her head facing roughly towards those descending stairs. The ascending stairwell directly to the left of that is moving up to a platform, which ultimately leads to the second floor. I was advised that Sophia Caneiro's body was located on that platform area. Firefighters had removed her body from the interior of the scene, and brought it out to the front porch area. Detectives, again, prior to my arrival, detectives had placed her body in a transport body bag and ultimately brought her to a pop-up tent, a temporary pop-up tent area that was created on the driveway. And lastly, Jesse Caneiro's body was located in the kitchen. Detectives had removed his body from the scene and placed it in a transport evidence bag, or transport body bag as well. He was brought out to that same pop-up tent area.
Now, did there come a time when you went inside of the house?
We did. So the decision was made because Jennifer Caneiro's body was still inside the house. They were having difficulty getting in there prior to my arrival, but the decision was made to enter the house again. While we did that through that foyer area, I did capture some photographs of that area as best I could, and then we entered for the purposes of removing Jennifer Caneiro's body from the scene. She was also placed in a separate transport body bag and brought to that same pop-up tent area.
Okay, so just in terms of the scene now, you have Jennifer and her two children's bodies are under the pop-up tent?
Yes.
And then Keith's body is still where it initially was when you arrived?
Yes, ma'am.
At about 3:10 p.m., did you begin processing the scene?
Yes.
Okay, and what specifically did you do first?
So I first documented Keith Caneiro's body under the tent. We were still waiting for investigators from the Middlesex Regional Medical Examiner's Office to arrive, but I documented the location of his body as well as what it looked like. His body was covered with a white sheet and then a red tarp. So I wanted to document that location, but also document any evidence that was visible in that area. There was a cellular phone located on the grass to the east of his body. So essentially where he was located, like I said, was in the, if you're standing on the street looking at the front of the residence, I think going forward I'm going to explain it this way, it'll be easier, but it was the front right of the property was where his body was located, and his head was facing roughly north towards the street away from the residence. So east of his body was his cellular phone. So I documented and collected that phone for two reasons. One, I knew that as the medical examiner's office arrives on scene, they're going to obviously do an on-scene examination. And I didn't want anything to happen to that cellular phone. But I also wanted to get it into the hands of the computer crimes unit as quickly as possible.
Now, overall, on November 20th, did you take photographs of both the inside and outside of 15 Willowbrook Road?
Yes, I did.
And did you also take photographs of the property and the inside of the property on several days thereafter?
Yes, I did.
I'm going to show you what has been marked as S1C. I'm showing counsel. Sir, did you recognize this?
Yes, I did.
And just in there, what are those?
These are the photographs throughout the investigation, but particularly the photographs I took at 15 Willowbrook Road.
Are they, and let me just ask you, you and I sat down and in preparation for trial, we painstakingly went through the numerous photos that you took, is that correct?
Correct.
And we narrowed down the ones for purposes of trial so we don't have to show every single one of them, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, the photos in there, are they a fair and accurate depiction of what the scene looked like at the time you were photographing it?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I can take that. Judge, permission to publish specific photos.
Any objection? No. Okay. Sure. We can drop the lights.
Please have slide 120. Sergeant, what are we looking at here?
So, as I referenced earlier, if you're stepping through the front door, turn to your immediate left, facing east. There's two sets of stairwells. The ones to the left of this photograph are the ascending stairwell that run along the front of the house, leading up to the second floor. That, it's difficult to tell, but that to the right of that is the descending stairs. Those lead into the basement. There's heavy smoke throughout the residence, but particularly coming up through that basement area. Jennifer Caneiro's body is located just at the top of those stairs that lead into the basement, and their yellow tarp was placed over her body by fire personnel.
So just to be clear, Jennifer's body is located under that tarp in this picture?
Correct.
Can we please have slide 121? Just a little bit of a different angle.
Yeah, so just kind of going forward, the way I take my photographs, especially the overall photographs, is working in a clockwise direction as best I can, and then panning from left to right. It doesn't have to be left to right, just the way I do it, but so I'm taking overlapping photographs. If I were standing in each corner of this courtroom, for example, I'm going to photo this area so that they overlap slightly so I don't essentially miss anything. So that's what we're doing here. I'm standing in the same area.
Let's bring back in our guest still with us, trial attorney Mackenzie Joy Brennan. And Mackenzie, one of the tacks that the defense has taken in this case is that they're challenging the investigation into the case. Well, now we have the lead detective on the stand. So I imagine this is very important testimony that prosecutors are being very careful with, but also the defense has to really prepare for the cross-examination.
Yeah, you know, I feel for the defense in this case because it seems like an incredibly hard job with the fact pattern that we have. So far from what I've seen, a lot of their arguments are essentially, you know, my client couldn't have done this because it is so absurd. But the absurd thing already happened. The absurdly tragic thing, somebody had to have done it. So I think that they're really pigeonholed with the kind of defenses that they can make because, you know, arguments like, well, it wasn't enough money and maybe it was the other brother. The crazy thing happened, and the most likely scenario is that this guy did it. Now, from what I saw of the expert yesterday, I also saw some compelling investigative-based arguments that, you know, people knew their attackers, if memory serves, that the bullet wipe gave some indication that somebody didn't flee. So it sounds like a lot of the investigation is pretty solid too. And this guy who's on the stand now, he is coming across very credible. So I'll be interested to see what the defense does with this. I feel like they're grasping at straws a little bit just because the facts of the case are so awful and so stacked against their client.
Yeah, and I think the fact that you're referring to is that on the jacket of Keith Caneiro that he was in that night, the distance of the gun to the jacket was very, very close. Right. So the sense is that, you know, this person was able to walk right up to them.
Right, and I just was going to ask you about some of those details because it's so personal in nature. I think when you hear the two children were stabbed in the face, there was a yellow tarp that we just saw through this witness's testimony put on top of the mother of the children. These kinds of things to me scream it had to have been personal.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And the fact that the brother's own house then was found on fire, but the only distinction between the two cases is that there wasn't a murder first in his case. I mean, how do you get out of that scenario? And the fact that he did kill the children, especially given that the parents, you know, were not intended to survive, it seems. And I could really see that as the only quote unquote logical reason for somebody killing the children is to hurt the parents, but that's just unhinged. It just seems rage-based.
I agree. Unhinged, rage-based, I think are great terms for that.
Yeah, the other difference between the fires was the one set at Paul's own house wasn't nearly as dangerous as the one he set in his brother's house. So there's that as well. All right, Mackenzie, stand by. We're going to take a break. Folks, when we come back, we'll have more testimony in the murder trial of Paul Caneiro. We're going to hear about Keith's death. When we come back, keep it here on Court TV.